Over 1,800 leaders and representatives of social movements are gathering in Caracas, Venezuela, to celebrate the Bicentennial Congress of the Peoples of the World. The Cuban-developed COVID-19 vaccine candidate named Abdala has shown over 92% efficacy in clinical trials. The party of Armenia's prime minister has won the snap elections with a 54% majority. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Gladys Quesada. Over 1,800 leaders and representatives of social movements from more than 160 countries are gathering as of Monday in Caracas, Venezuela. The event is the Bicentennial Congress of the Peoples of the World, convened in commemoration of the decisive independence battle of Carabobo, Venezuela, in 1821, led by Simón Bolívar. International delegates will exchange on the integration of the Global South and the struggle for independence and sovereignty by countries like Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, and others currently under attack by the United States and European imperialism. The Congress is being coordinated by the Sao Paulo Forum, an international group of left-wing and progressive Latin American parties and movements. It will meet both in presential and virtual formats from Monday, June 21st through the Thursday, June 24th. Over the last 3 days, 6 people were murdered in Colombia, 3 of them well-known social leaders, while the 43rd massacre of this year was committed. Our correspondent, Hernán Tovar, has more details on the violence that does not stop in this South American country.
Human rights organizations reported a new massacre in the department of Antioquia. 3 social leaders were victims of illegal armed groups and paramilitaries. With these cases, 43 massacres have been committed and 75 social leaders have been murdered so far in 2021.
These are disputed regions, disputes over territory, resources, mining, roads, and thirdly, there are structures, there are macro-criminal structures, and they are not just small armed groups. There are mafias, there are paramilitaries, and there are political interests involved. And on the other hand, the government is responsible for omission and for the type of policies, because instead of protecting social leaders and communities, it persecutes protesters and wages a new war.
The first record of a series of murders against social leaders was that of Gustavo Solís Ramos, who belonged to a black community in Buenaventura, Valle del Cauca department, an area where the Ombudsman's office had issued alert due to the level of violence in the city, as a result of territorial disputes and clashes between criminal gangs.
They continue to kill, to attack, to threaten. They continue to generate these strategies to eliminate and silence the voices of resistance that we raise in our territories. I believe and consider that the state must also provide these effective guarantees for all of us who are leaders in the territories and for all of us who defend the rights of black communities, because Buenaventura is becoming a time bomb.
Also reported was the assassination of Lucía Solarte, who had stood as a candidate for the Manaure Council in the department of Cesar and was a social leader, as well as that of Ángel Miro Cartagena, who led the drafting of the development programs with a territorial approach, and the Farmers Association in Dabeiba, in Antioquia, a department where more than 10 social leaders have been assassinated.
This interest of armed groups of politicians, businessmen, are interests to continue the war, to do business with weapons and violence, and at the same time to prepare the ground to consolidate their political power toward the elections of 2022. All of this is related.
In this context, and during her inaugural speech at the 47th session of the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, requested that demonstrations and the right to peaceful assembly be respected in Colombia. She stated that 56 deaths have been confirmed, 44 civilians and 2 police officers during the more than 50 days of demonstrations.
TeleSUR, Bogotá, Colombia.
United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights Michelle Bachelet this Monday denounced the greatest and most serious setbacks in human rights we have ever seen. As part of a speech to the top UN human rights body, Bachelet expressed deep concern regarding the serious human rights violations during Colombia's widespread anti-government protest.
My office has expressed deep concern at allegations of serious human rights violations by state security forces. While most demonstration has been peaceful, several instances of violence have been recorded. My office condemns all forms of violence, calls for full respect for the right to peaceful assembly, and encourages dialogue to resolve the crisis. From 28th of April to 16 June, we registered allegations of 56 deaths, including 54 civilians and 2 police officers in the context of the protests, mainly in the city of Cali, as well as 49 alleged victims of sexual violence.
More than 300 organizations support the request for Chilean President Sebastián Piñera to be tried for crimes against humanity, submitted to the International Criminal Court. The request, submitted to the court on April 29th, refers to the grave abuses committed during the period known as the social outbreak in 2019, during which mass protests against the Piñera government were met with brutal repression by the security forces. National and international human rights organizations have recorded eye injuries caused by the impact of rubber bullets, deliberately shot at protesters' faces, torture, deaths, sexual abuse, and a series of other abuses and serious violations. These have been compiled into a dossier of evidence. In Brazil, this Monday, former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva and 6 other people were acquitted in the Operation Celores corruption case, which surrounds an alleged fraud and bribery scheme into the automotive sector. The judge of the Federal Supreme Court in Brasilia ruled that there was a lack of evidence to support a sentence against the accused. In this context, Lula's defense team noted that the latest ruling further confirms the former president was the victim of a series of unfounded and politically motivated accusations. Lula da Silva was indicted in 2017 for allegedly editing a legislative measure to favor companies in the automotive sector through an extension of tax benefits for 5 years in exchange for bribes through the Fiscal Resources Administration Council. Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez met with the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres this Monday on the occasion for his visit to the UN headquarters in New York. In a message published on his Twitter account, the Cuban diplomat described the meeting as fruitful and reiterated Cuba's support for the strengthening of multilateralism. The foreign minister arrived at the UN headquarters to present the resolution and participate in the upcoming General Assembly vote against the US blockade of Cuba. On Wednesday, the General Assembly will vote again on the report entitled Necessity of Ending the Economic, Commercial and Financial Embargo imposed by the United States of America against Cuba, which has been supported by the vast majority of the international community on 28 previous occasions. The huge impacts of the U.S. blockade on Cuba's health system have been further accentuated amid the battle against COVID-19. The U.S. government has maintained the cruel measures against the island instead of easing them in the midst of the pandemic. However, the Cuban government, scientists, and the health sector workers have successfully overcome many of the obstacles to protect the health of the population. Cuba's top epidemiologist, Dr. Francisco Duran, talks us through some of the steps taken.
Cuba, cuando empieza la pandemia, tenía 3 laboratorios de biología molecular para el diagnóstico de diferentes enfermedades. Hoy, nosotros podemos hablar de que en todas las provincias de nuestro país existe un laboratorio de biología molecular, en estos momentos dedicado al diagnóstico de la COVID. Se irán incorporando otros diagnósticos con esta misma tecnología, muy costosa en su montaje y muy costosa en su mantenimiento, porque lleva reactivos, recursos gastables que son caros, que una parte se producen en nuestro país, pero que necesariamente tenemos que importar. Y ahí es donde el bloqueo pues interfiere de manera importante, porque son recursos que tal vez comprándolo a un vecino cercano nos saldrían más económicos, pero lamentablemente esos recursos tenemos que irlos a buscar a países distantes que hacen costoso y enredado la transportación y el acceso a ellos. Si en Cuba no hubiéramos tenido bloqueo que además, no obstante la pandemia que ha afectado a todo el mundo y que por un problema humanitario era justo que se hubiera disminuido, si no se hubiera quitado, por lo menos se hubiera disminuido, pues indiscutiblemente el acceso a tecnologías, el acceso a recursos de diagnóstico, pues el acceso a medicamentos, pues hubiera sido menos costoso para nuestro país. Cuba se creció, como lo ha hecho con muchas cosas. El bloqueo también es un virus.
And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. The Cuban-developed COVID-19 vaccine candidate named Abdala has shown over 92% efficacy in clinical trials. 3 doses of Abdala have been administered in the trials, which have included hundreds of thousands of Cubans, to show 92.28% efficacy. This surpasses several of the vaccines being used globally against the virus and comes despite the immense limitations to which the country is subjected due to the U.S. blockade and sanctions. Over the weekend, it was also announced that Cuba's Soberana 02 vaccine candidate shows 62% efficacy with 2 of its 3 doses in trials, with a 3rd dose, the Soberana Plus, expected to further boost this efficacy. The highly anticipated news means Cuba is one step closer to authorizing its vaccine candidates for mass emergency use. And Brazil's health minister is set to appear once again before the Senate committee investigating the national government's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, as he and other 13 are now being formally investigated for negligence. Health Minister Marcelo Queiroga has already appeared before the committee several times, with senators complaining that he failed to give a straight answer to their questions. After weeks of listening to the main players, the Senate Investigative Committee announced Friday that 14 people are now being formally investigated for negligence in confronting COVID-19. Meanwhile, the population continues to mobilize to demand vaccines, as well as financial support in the midst of the ongoing economic crisis. Just over 11% of the population has been fully immunized. A cemetery in Colombia reported almost double the number of cremations over a 1-year period due to COVID-19 related fatalities. The privately owned Campo de Paz burial ground reflects Colombia's health crisis as a whole. The country is facing its highest coronavirus peak so far, with over 24,000 cases emerging daily since June the 9th. Only in what has passed of this month, the country has seen over 25,000 fatalities.
Regarding COVID services, the increase is much higher, since in that period of time from January to May 2020, we had 4 services, while we had 246 services this year. Of course, it's really worrying, because you have kids and a wife, a home, and maybe you'll take the infection home. You get worried about that. At the beginning, it was more stressful, but now we are adapting to the environment and you manage it with more calm.
The United Kingdom has seen a continuous increase in its vaccination rate, yet the government has delayed lifting all restrictions as the variant originally identified in India takes hold. More than 42.9 million people have been given their first jab of the coronavirus vaccine across the country, while over 31.3 million people have been fully vaccinated with a second dose. The number of people vaccinated in the UK accounts for over 60% of the total population. The death rate has also remained low. Meanwhile, the Conservative government announced that as the Delta coronavirus strain spreads rapidly in some parts of the country, England will postpone lifting the final phase of the COVID-19 lockdown restrictions for another 4 weeks. A plan for Africa's first COVID-19 vaccine facility using breakthrough technology has been announced by the World Health Organization, South Africa and France. The plan uses messenger ribonucleic acid technology that has been used for the first time to make vaccines during the current coronavirus health crisis as part of the global inoculation effort. The WHO and its COVAX partners are working with a South African consortium comprising BioVac, Afrigen, Biologics and the Vaccines, a network of universities and the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to establish its first vaccine technology transfer hub. Moderna, Pfizer and BioNTech have used this technology to make doses, which some trials have been shown to be more effective than more traditionally made versions. A lack of manufacturing capacity in Africa is seen as one of the main barriers to inoculating the continent. Expressing his delight about the new facility, the Director General of the World Health Organization stated that the UN agency is in discussions with different companies and institutions to help create the state-of-the-art lab required to implement this technology.
I'm delighted to announce that WHO is in discussions with a consortium of companies and institutions to establish a technology transfer hub in South Africa. The consortium involves a company called Afrigen Biologics and Vaccines, which will act as the hub both by manufacturing mRNA vaccines itself and by providing training to a second manufacturer called BioVac. WHO is facilitating this effort by establishing the criteria for the technology transfer, assessing the applications, developing standards, and providing ongoing support and training. We are now in negotiations with several companies that have indicated interest in providing their mRNA technology to the hub. This selection will be based on how advanced the technology is in terms of clinical efficacy data and on the terms under which the company is willing to share its technology.
And also, in announcing the news, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa stressed that Africa can't wait for jobs to arrive from elsewhere.
That we just cannot continue to rely on vaccines that are made outside of Africa because they never come, they never arrive on time, and people continue to die. And we've therefore called on the waiver, as I spoke about, but also technology transfer. So this is a phenomenal step.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back. The party of Armenia's Prime Minister's civil contract has won the snap elections held on Sunday with a 54% majority according to the Electoral Commission. Armenia's acting Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan called for the vote amid the crisis triggered by the country's defeat in a war with Azerbaijan over the Nagorno-Karabakh region last year. The opposition Armenia alliance, led by former President Robert Kocharyan, is a distant second with 21%. The coalition said it will not recognize Pashinyan's victory, alleging widespread fraud. And observers from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe said the Armenian polls were competitive and well run.
Won early parliamentary elections in the Republic of Armenia. They are competitive and generally well managed with a short time frame. Voters were provided with a broad range of options, and fundamental rights and freedoms were generally respected, with contestants being able to campaign freely.
New sanctions against Belarus have been announced by the European Union in coordination with the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom. The bloc's diplomacy chief, Joseph Borrell, said the European Union ministers meeting in Luxembourg on Monday discussed broad-ranging measures targeting the Belarusian economy, such as potash fertilizer exports, the tobacco industry, petroleum and petrochemical products, and the financial sector. The sanctions were grounded on the allegedly forced landing of a Ryanair passenger plane and the subsequent arrest of a neo-Nazi opposition activist who was on board. Belarus claims the plane pilot had requested the landing and called for a help due to a bomb alert message. Although an investigation is still underway, the European Union already seems to have pronounced its sentence. The provocations of Israeli settlers and Zionists continue, this time with marches to stop what they call illegal Arab control in an area of the Israeli-occupied Palestinian territory of the West Bank. Settlers organized a march with a national flag in a newly built settler outpost near the Palestinian village of Beira, south of Nablus in the occupied West Bank. Palestinians have been protesting for weeks against the expansion of the Jewish settlement. Israel retains full control over planning and construction in the zone known as Area Z, but illegal settlers accuse the Israeli government of turning a blind eye to what they term illegal Palestinian building in the area. All Israeli settlements in Palestinian territories are actually illegal, according to international law. Several protests were also held in the Hebron Hills, Binyamin, and Etzion block regions of the West Bank, along with other areas. The United Nations has stressed that children can no longer be the last priority of the international agenda, nor the least protected group from the individuals on the planet. According to the annual report of the Secretary General of Children and Armed Conflict, the year 2020 was marked by a sustained and high number of grave violations. This included the recruitment and use of children in conflict, followed by the killing, maiming, and incidents of denial of humanitarian access. The highest numbers of grave violations were verified in Afghanistan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Somalia, the Syrian Arab Republic, and Yemen. Presenting the annual report, United Nations Special Representative Virginia Gamba called for protection for children, also in Palestine, and called for a peaceful solution in the Middle East. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please follow us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.